Well, I think the United States congressmen are behaving very irresponsibly on the US-China contest, because they, instead of trying to carefully analyze the whole picture and figure out what are the long-term interests of the United States and how to advance these long-term interests in the United States, which will be a mixture of competition and cooperation within US and China. Instead, they are purely engaged in scoring political points domestically. I explain in Chapter 7 that this is not a contest between democracy and autocracy. This is a contest between plutocracy in the United States of America, where public policy decisions are made not to benefit the population at large, but the public policy decisions are made to benefit a small sector of the population, the top 10%, top 20%. And that's why the standard of living of the bottom 50% of the America's population hasn't gone up in several decades. By contrast, China has had the world's largest poverty alleviation program, and over 800 million people have been rescued from absolute poverty in China. And this obviously makes the people happy and gives them a sense of hopefulness for the future. And I think a plutocracy is therefore at a competitive disadvantage when it has to deal with a meritocracy in China, and therefore no politician in America dares to suggest that America has become a plutocracy, because in some ways it is the US Congress that is responsible for the creation of a plutocracy, because the US Congress takes money from very wealthy people to shape policies that will benefit the very wealthy people. So clearly, for China to overtake the United States, it has got to continue growing at 4 to 5 to 6% a year. And the question is whether or not you believe China can grow at 4 to 5%. And I actually believe that China can, because China is still educating hundreds of millions of people and raising their education levels, and people with a higher education level with access to capital and other resources are able to be economically more productive. And over the next 10, 20 years, I predict that China's economy will be number 1, United States economy will be number 2, and India's economy will be number 3. And I think it's important for the United States to assess whether such a containment policy can succeed or not succeed. I believe that, unlike in the case of the Soviet Union, where the containment policy succeeded because the Soviet Union hardly did any trade with the rest of the world, but in the case of China, since China trades more with the rest of the world than the United States does, any effort to contain these Chinese trading relationships will fail. So I think it's important, therefore, for the United States to consider the possibility that a wiser course than a containment policy would be a new, different form of engagement policy, but an engagement policy that takes place within multilateral fora. I think Hong Kong has a very important role to play in terms of providing a different autonomous space for American companies to establish themselves in before they begin investing in China. Hong Kong, in many respects, still remains an autonomous entity and still has its own rule of law, and still has its own financial center, its own stock exchange, and so on and so forth. I believe that the 21st century will be the Asian century. The reason I mention that is that countries around the world are preparing for the Asian century. They know that the Asian century is coming because the Asian countries are growing faster than any other countries in the world. And at the end of the day, the most important thing the world needs today is peace. and we should work hard to establish peace in Asia also. Well, I think it's very sad that the leaders of Taiwan have failed to educate their own population on how dangerous the situation is going to be for Taiwan. And in this game of geopolitical chess, Taiwan is a small pawn that could be easily sacrificed. So it's very important for the Taiwanese people to ensure that they don't do something that will damage them. It was a mistake, for example, for Taiwan to host a visit of the US Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, and because she was not doing it because she loved the Taiwanese people, she was doing it for political grandstanding at home to enhance her status. The danger for Taiwan is that they'll be used by politicians for their own purposes, and the interests of the Taiwanese people will be sacrificed in the process. So the Taiwanese people must become very shrewd and very brutally honest in understanding what is happening on the US-China front and ensure that they don't get caught in the crossfire in any way.